Welcome back to the second panel of the day, which is on the views from the states. And we have with us, the bios are with you in your program, so I'll not sort of go through them. We have with us Deepak Sanan, Abha Joshi, Ram Singh, and Kumar is not here at the moment, and Jackie. And so my understanding is, Ram, you're the only one with a presentation? I mean, a PowerPoint presentation, right? Abha, do you have a, no, right? So what we'll do is we'll go with Professor Ram Singh first, and then so that we'd get the the presentation out of the way, and then we'll move on to, and then those spaces can also be filled up if required. So we can put that stuff in place. So Ram, I'll just go back up. Floor's yours. No, don't worry, just let me know.
Thank you, Partho, and thank you, Namita. So, my presentation will cover compensation issues. So, in Delhi, the state of Haryana, state of Punjab, and Union Territory of Chandigarh. My focus will be on the issue of compensation. I will present the results I will share with you. They are at a variance with the report Namita and her colleagues have put together, but the variance is not, the way I look at it, the differences are not by way of contradiction, but supplement to a very rich study which they have put together. So let's, can we go to the first slide, Partho? So in the report, in the CPR report, if you see, if you had a chance to look at the issue of compensation, so the question here is that imagine a scenario where government has taken away your property. When government takes away your property, then government offers you some compensation, and if you are unhappy with the government provided compensation, you can go to court. The first court you go to is ADJ court, lower court, or reference court. So these numbers show increase in compensation, the compensation increased provided by lower courts compare over and above what government had provided. For example, the first row talks about types of agriculture land in Delhi. There are 470 instances covered, and the average increase is about 18%. What is noteworthy is that minimum increase is 0, which is to say that no court has decreased compensation. As opposed to this, in the report, in the CPR report, you will see that there are some numbers with negative sign, which is to say that in some cases courts did not increase, rather than increasing, court reduced the compensation that was ultimately received by the property owner. So that's one point to note from this slide. The other is that if you go down the first column, type of land, if you look at agricultural properties, then when agriculture land was acquired, then increase in compensation by judiciary was little over 18%. As you go down this column, you look at residential properties, then the increase is about 30%. If you go further down to commercial and mixed use properties, then the increase in compensation the increase in compensation by judiciary over and above government provided compensation, it goes up. So it's a suggestive, I won't say that it's a conclusive evidence, but it is a suggestive proof showing that the litigation is more in favor of high-value property owners. Commercial properties are more valuable compared to agricultural land, and so it seems that litigation has been more beneficial to high-value property owners compared to low-value property owners. And if you also are willing to assume that high-value property owners are also happen to be rich, then it's a suggestive evidence that litigation is more favorable, comes in very handy to people who are resourceful, who are rich, compared to people who own low-value properties and presumably are also not rich, are poor. Can we go to the next slide, Partha? So here, so that slide was about Delhi, and here are some data covering Punjab, Haryana, and Union Territory of Chandigarh. So this slide support the study, CPR study. So between Haryana and Punjab, so there have been more disputes. So this data. So in this data, I have covered high court judgments, Punjab and Haryana high court judgments delivered over 2 years, 2010 and 11, and more cases came from Haryana than from Punjab, and that's so Haryana and Punjab compare similarly in the CPR study, and so then there are questions why that is happening. One is that proximity to CPR and proximity to NCAR, and also and therefore to CPR. but it's, I think, the urbanization that is, if you look at the CPR figures, so it seems to be that the process of urbanization is driving the relationship between the extent of urbanization of a state and the number of disputes originating from that state. They seem to go hand in hand. Can we go to the next slide? So here, on this slide, I compare government provided compensation, which is LAC, Land Acquisition Collector. So when we compare court provided compensation in the first column, that compares ADJ over LAC. LAC is Land Acquisition Collector, ADJ is Additional District Judge. And here also it shows that so the minimum increase is 0. In no case the court reduced compensation, but here the increase in compensation is substantial. So overall, if you compare government provided compensation with high court provided compensation, that would be the last column. So it shows increase of about 300%. So that is a substantial increase in compensation, and most of this land came from rural areas. Most of land was agriculture land that is covered in these more than 1,600 court cases. And in some cases, the amount of increase, the extent of increase is incredible, and I have some explanation for that. But again, takeaway is that the flip side to litigation is safe. There is no reducing of court compensation by the court. Can we go to the next slide? And Partha, how much time do I have? 10 minutes more?
Sure.
Okay, good. So now So from my study, I have come to a conclusion that on the issue of compensation, almost every single instance of land acquisition lands up in some court, lower court, high court, or Supreme Court, almost every single instance on the issue of compensation. I am not talking about litigation against acquisition as such. I am talking about specifically on the compensation issue. Almost all instances have gone to court. And in almost all instances, as this data suggests, courts have increased compensation. There seems to be extensive litigation on the compensation issue. So it's different from people going to the street and in some cases protest turned violent, but that's different. That's litigation opposition to acquisition. So that's not related to compensation. This data pertains to compensation. Now the question is why there is so much of litigation. Is it because the government is undercompensating property owners, farmers, as the case may be, or is it the judiciary that is overcompensating? We can see that the compensation provided by government on one hand and judiciary provided by on the other hand, they are very different. One is so judiciary provided compensation is significantly higher, but it does not answer the question whether there is undercompensation by the government or more generous overcompensation by the court. And so the point I want to make is that litigation can happen regardless of whether there is overcompensation or undercompensation. Here is a simple illustration. Think of two properties, A and B. And suppose they are of same size but of different market value. They command different per square meter rate in market. And suppose government provides compensation on the basis of 1,000 per square meter for first property and double at 2,000 per square meter for second property. But judiciary also applied similar logic. Judiciary increases by 300 for the first property and by 600 for the second property. Then you will see that both property owners will go to court. Both will gain from compensation, and it does not matter what market value is. So some litigation can be strategic in nature. So that's the point. But point I want to get at is whether the government provided compensation, is it adequate, and judiciary is getting wrong, or judiciary is getting it right and government is getting it wrong, or both are getting it, both are undercompensating. I will argue that even the judiciary provided compensation has been very generous compared to what government offered, but even judiciary is undercompensating. Can we go to the next slide? So to contextualize my argument, we know how compensation is determined in India in government departments at the Land Acquisition Collector's Office. Land acquisition, so in the first session, there was a debate about, protecting land acquisition collectors and other government officials against, hell that may fall on them, under the LAR Act. There was also discussion as to, why they may fear audit by superiors and may play it safe. To me, so there are various narratives that can be built, but the most plausible, most in sync with the reality seems to be the case that every district collector's office has what are called circle rates. Every registrar's office, land acquisition collectors has what are called stamp duty rates, registry rates, or circle rates. So the same idea known with the different names in different parts of the country. These rates are there in their department, in their offices. They have immediate and easy access to these rates. In contrast, if they were to go to field to assess market value of a property and provide compensation based on their assessment of market value of property, that will be costly, that will be time-consuming, uncomfortable work for them. So between a comfortable option and other, even if there is no risk other, at least they will have to visit the property and will apply their mind. So even on this ground, they go for using circle rates, stamp duty rates, and don't go for actual assessment of market value. So that's what happened at Land Acquisition Collector's Office, and therefore government provided compensation is generally based on circle rates or stamp duty rates. As to judges, when matter goes to court, then judges have to look at evidence, and circle rates of course also constitute evidence, but sale deeds of similar properties also constitute evidence that courts invariably look at. And and as a matter of fact, most courts end up using sale deed rates as a basis for compensation. And sale deed rates tend to be greater than circle rates. And why that happens, so can we go to the next slide? Now in any situation, think of the neighborhood you live in. So that neighborhood, that area has, if you live in city, it has circle rates, especially in NCR. And in any other city, you have circle rates or stamp duty rates. You also have stamp duty rates for rural areas. As the politics of circle rates and stamp duty rates is that generally in normal times when government is not taking away our properties, we want low circle rates, we want low stamp duty rates, because these rates are tax. If we engage in voluntary transactions, then we pay a tax on the value of property that depends on stamp duty rates. And generally in peace times, people want, the politics demands that these rates be lower than average market value in that property. But the problem is that if you have low circle rates, then people want to if whoever wants to minimize paying stamp duty, they have tendency to underreport. And as a result, the figure looks, the situation looks something like this. If a property enjoys, market rate of, let's say, 1,500, so on an average, its circle rates would be like 1,000. And sale deeds would be somewhere in between, let's say, like 1,300. So in this situation, government offices, so even though market value is at 1,500, government land acquisition collector will provide compensation based on 1,000, and court will provide compensation based on 1,300. Both end up providing inadequate compensation, undercompensating, though the courts bring compensation closer to what legal entitlements are, which is market value. Or the next question is, Parthu, can we go to the next slide? So now on the question of, the question of equity, whether court outcomes are regressive or progressive. I argued that court outcome litigation is regressive in the sense it tends to be pro-rich in favor of high value property owners. Now there are one possible scenario could be, if you, on the horizontal axis, suppose we plot market value, we arrange properties in the order of increasing market value on horizontal axis, and up there on vertical axis, we have compensation. If compensation is equal to market value of property, then that would mean that we will follow that black line. What I have tried to convince you is that in reality, government provided compensation is below court provided compensation, and court provided compensation is below black line. So that's the arrangement. But the question is government provided compensation increase in direct proportion of market value, or it is also more progressive or regressive? Can we go to next slide, Parthu? So it turns out that next data I will show you would be to corroborate the claim that government provided compensation also tends to be regressive, in the sense that high value property owners tend to get fair deal not only from judiciary but also from government. And over and above it tends to snowball, accentuate. So in the first place, high value property owners get better deal from government, and they get even better deal from judiciary. So that's the nature of compensation. So this is clearly ruled out, and can we go to the next slide? So the next slide is about regression model they present some results of, but it's based on a large project that spanned across 60 villages, and it was irrigation project of 108 kilometers. It affected 60. So based on this specifically for this project, I have been able to conclude that both high value property owners are getting better deal both from government and judiciary. So let's skip this one. So this is the message that this is empirical support behind the graphs I showed to you. Can we go? And I have 2 minutes, right? Now 3. So very good. So now when it comes to, so that was about past. How will our future look like? So, and the future law jury is still out. We don't know what our future law is. So the central law is Land Acquisition Act 2014. So LAR 2013 has 3 major departures from old law. So old law led to inequities, the type of inequities I presented. But under the new law, one major change relates to private purpose acquisition, which has become harder now, specifically on the issue of compensation. So now under new law, so earlier on you were supposed to get market value of your property plus a solatium of 30%, which was like you were getting 1.3 times of market value of your property. So the market value meant a different thing for different entities. For government, it was circle rate. For property owners, it was real market value. And for judiciary, it was sale deed rates. But under the new law, the compensation has to be at least twice the market value. So what will be implication of this? Will this reduce litigation or not? So we now go back to the first question I started with. Can we go to the next slide, Parthu? Now that's the situation. If we go back the example we used, we started off with, as long as land acquisition collector, government officers do not provide compensation adequately in the first place, the litigation will not come down. If anything, it can become more profitable, because earlier on, the gain from litigation will be 39,000 in this simple example, but now those gains will increase to 60,000, and even more for high-value properties. Can we go to the next? Now, I want to use my last 2 minutes to talk about the social impact assessment and resettlement and rehabilitation. So when the BJP government came in power in 2014, they wanted to, so their measure, they did not question twice the market value, because they knew that, market value is ridiculously low as far as government is concerned. So they were not against twice the market value, doubling of market value, but they have been very uncomfortable with social impact assessment. They also projected the ordinance. When they came out with ordinance did not take away resettlement and rehabilitation. They only indirectly took away the provisions for social impact assessment. But fact is that without doing social impact assessment, you don't know who to resettle and who to rehabilitate. So therefore, they directly, though on the face of it, R&R was kept there, but indirectly it was seriously undermined. And so it seems that politicians, they think very similarly, across continents, across countries. So here is 1905, and here is one of the well-known or infamously known American politicians, George Washington Plunkett. He defines, what an honest graft is in case of eminent domain land acquisition land acquisition issue. Can we go to the next slide? So this is what he says. He says that how you can make money in an honest way. So he says, just let me explain, and he has put it in writing. My party is in power in the city, and it's going to undertake a lot of public improvements, and therefore it will need to use eminent domain. Well, I am tipped off, say that they are going to lay out a new park at a certain place. I see my opportunity, I take it, I go to that place and buy up all the land I can buy in that neighborhood. And then he tries to extract better deal from the government or the city council, whatever the case, as the case may be. Now we have some Plunketts in India even today. So can we go to the next slide? In some writings, I have documented similar practices in NCR and elsewhere. So our Plunketts are known with different names, but this is how. Suppose government, it's a hypothetical example, but suppose government needs land for some, let's say for public purpose, and suppose they need the land that is shown in the top box. Generally government, so there is enough empirical support that generally government will claim that we are going to be needing a much larger area. So generally they will cover several villages, and the area covered under notification will be much larger than they actually need. So, and what happens in the process? Can we go to the last slide and my last minute? So what happens that, when government declares that we are going to take away this we are going to use eminent domain over this very large area, then distress sales start. Even though legally you are not supposed to enter in any land transaction after the notification, but anything goes and everything goes, distress sales start. So it shows a situation, so I have documented, I have enough documentary evidence to show, to prove a situation like this, that, government's first notification was about a much larger area. What government actually ended up buying was these black plots. You see the black colored squares. So that's what government actually ended up buying. But under distress, the blue color properties, they were with farmers, but they ended up with the developers because farmers sold those properties under duress. So fearing that if government takes away your property, you will get 1,000. So from court, you will get 13,000. That will still be below 1,500. That's the price of your property. And the other point noteworthy from this depiction is that when it comes to making a case for eminent domain, it is primarily, even for public purposes, it's the contiguity problem. You know, it's the land assembly problem that you need land in contiguity. That justifies eminent domain. Without land as assembly problem, without contiguity problem, there'll be no justification for compulsory acquisition, land acquisition. In many cases, so what the government ended up acquiring was not contiguous land. So this is how our blankets behave, and the social impact assessment can stop that, because it asks a question, you know, how much land you need, can you do with smaller size, smaller area. So if you take away social impact assessment, you take away, you leave scope for such practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. And now, Deepak, since Ram's hypothesis is largely about how government behaves, I think it'd be only appropriate that you follow him and either confirm or contest that claim.
Thanks, Partha. This is a tough act to follow. It's not the first time I have to follow Professor Ram Singh. Since morning, so much has been said. I wonder what there is new to be said. Everything's been said at one level. As a good former civil servant, I'll find new ways to say the same thing. You know, I ponder what is, you know, we conflate two issues in all our discussions on this subject. Are we trying to look at litigation as something which we want to have less of? Disputes on land acquisition? Is this our prime objective? Or are we going beyond this and looking at, say, the acquisition process itself? Is it fair? Is it addressing every issue? And therefore, are we going beyond the law, so to say? And both these issues are being debated since morning. At different levels, we are trying to address both these. And as a civil servant of many years, obviously, in the work environment, one's role was largely related to applying the law itself. Although you could say that civil servants should also be looking at making policy which is fair, which tries to address, seldom happens, of course. Huh? The study itself brings out, and repeated a number of times since morning, that the key issue which people agitate is compensation. And clearly, where they agitate most, as your examples also show, is where values are higher. All very logical. The economic rationale is clear. It's about money, and where there's more money, there's going to be more litigation. So if I go back to the issue of, am I trying to address the extent of litigation? And am I going to be able to reduce this by addressing some of the points which this study brings out and which we are hoping that LARR will bring into prominence? I'm not sure. In fact, I'll go a little further and, like Professor Ram Singh, I'll say no. It's not going to really reduce litigation, really speaking. Because while you may, from a legal angle, clearly the old acts after the 84 amendment brought in huge incentive to litigate, because compensation was likely to increase dramatically if you went to court. So there was an incentive. But the fact that collectors would always pitch for a lower rate in awarding compensation, sure. I mean, we've had since morning, we've discussed this, and we've had this repetition. The study itself talks about a collector who says, you know, all I can get is some abuse from the court if I pitch it too low. but I could end up in jail if I pitch it too high. You know, this really is true. As a person who's worked in government for many years, I can tell you, this is true. If you are seen, and while there may be talk that, if I could have sort of immunity laws, etc., will it help? No, it's not going to help. There will always be ways of getting at someone in the service if you want to get at them, and therefore, in our current system, the incentive for someone who doesn't want to be in trouble to play safe will be enormously high. The person who's, as they say in the, who are dabang, that's the word very often used. Jo dabang hai, who is willing to go out and really, be Plunkett's sort of accomplice or even be Plunkett's boss, they're going to get away with it anyway. But the everyday, normal civil servant trying to do their job, if they don't play safe, have a greater chance of getting into trouble than not getting into trouble. If they are seen to, if someone wants to just show that they are trying to be smart, be sort of, you really have to play a very smart strategic game to try and do something which is seemingly the fair thing to do, seemingly the right thing to do by a large number of people and not by a particular vested interest. The kind of strategic game you need to play in the civil service is not everybody's cup of tea. I don't think most people can succeed at it. You are most likely to get into trouble. Not everybody can manage things like KP has for 35 years in his civil service career. KP is brilliant. I mean, I have been always a great admirer. He knows how to work out, to get the right strategy in place in various situations. Not everybody can do it. Very few people can do it. And let's therefore be very clear that if we expect that compensation litigation will come down because civil servants will use LARR to better effect and award much higher compensation, this is a misplaced faith. I want to tell you one other thing. You would think, you and I, that, if we were just looking at it rationally, that sending people to court, making people litigate is a bad thing, right? Shouldn't the system be incentivizing behavior which says don't send people to court? Many years ago, I remember sitting in my office rather late in the evening and getting a call from the then Chief Minister asking me to do something and saying, why don't you do this? And I said, no, that would not be the right thing to do. It would be unfair to certain people. He said, no, but I'm under a lot of pressure. Why don't you just do it? So I said, those guys will be forced to go to court, because it's an unfair thing to do. And he said, well, let them go to court. I'm just trying to, with this anecdote, explain to you. I mean, my reaction aside, of course, I said, I can't be the cause of someone going to court for a patently wrong action on my part. And we sorted it out. It took a month or two, but we sorted out, but I'll park that aside. The point I really wanted to make was that here is a system which is actually telling you that let people go to court. Avoiding litigation is not the key. Reducing litigation is not the key objective which we are trying to follow in this system. We have a system, and we understand behind that we have built a system which, as this report points out, I was interested to see that while you've documented that it takes 20 years from notification to Supreme Court for a case to come to fruition, or whatever kind of fruition, but how does it compare with other civil litigation, other property litigation, not just land acquisition? Is it less or more? I would be surprised if it's more. It's probably less. Most property-related litigation must be twice as long. Okay? Right?
That's right. Yes.
So even as we bemoan this 20 years, let's be clear that our system actually is saying that it takes twice as long in a normal property-related case to get to where the person who's fighting for justice will get some kind of justice, and at the same time, the person who's avoiding that justice, who's trying to continue their wrongdoing, is likely to get away with it for about 2 generations, right? So what is the incentive in the systems? I just leave it for you to think. What are the incentives we are generating with all this? What are we telling various peoples? What is it that is behavior which is likely to get rewarded, and what is behavior which is likely to suffer? And what are the directions which does the current system or even LAR offer to us a possibility that these incentives will change? I'm not sure. I don't think so. I'm an optimist, but I think we have a fair way to go before we can start thinking of better role models in this system, better ways of doing things, and generating the right incentives for behavior. It's not there. It's nowhere near there right now. We can always come back to questions later. I'll just go. One thing I missed out on saying was, so I come from a state where land records are in better shape than most of India. We even have records for urban areas, which doesn't really exist in much of India. We have a political economy where access is more, it's a smaller state, people can access their representatives better. In land acquisition, the predominant mindset in the civil service would be that the person who's being subjected to acquisition is getting away with far more than they should. That's the prevailing mindset. It's not only about playing safe, it's also a view that you will have some kind of plunket business happening all the time. So wherever you have acquisition coming, people are already engaging in transactions, raising the rates enormously by doing small transactions, for very small pieces of land, making sure the average values go up enormously and trying to gain from that. So that would be the prevailing civil service notion of what is happening on the ground. The second would be that there is a vested interest in the civil courts to enhance very highly the awards. It's not only a question of what is fair, but a perception that there is something more operating in the civil courts to enhance compensation amounts. This is a state in which land ownership is very high as a proportion of number of people. We have probably the highest proportion in India. Small holdings, but everybody owns land. And the compensation is going to be the major reason why people will litigate. And when they, as you rightly say, when they see that it works, then they will definitely litigate in favor of that. I just wanted to, in some sort of disjointed fashion, bring to everybody's notice what, as a civil servant, I would say is the general perception of land acquisition issues in my state. At the overall level, as I said, I don't see things really changing too much. With LAR, possibly in theory, you will have more social impact assessments, you will have maybe more rights being looked at. In practice, I suspect procedures will get a go-by, will get short shrift, as they have in the past. Litigation will continue as enormously as it has in the past. It's not going to come down. It would be appropriate for us to continue to focus always on how do we improve the recording of rights in our existing land record systems. whether it's community rights, whether it's rights of others other than land, customary rights of various kinds. How do we keep trying to improve that record is, I think, a critical is a critical exercise or a critical project which we are not paying sufficient attention to, and we need to do more of, because if we can do more of that, then we are laying the basis for a better implementation of LARR or any other law. If we don't get it right, we will continue with even more problems than we have. We may be able to reduce them a bit if we can get better records in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. So with that sobering note that you're going to have a lot of litigation, it's only fair that I turn to Abha Joshi to see whether how best, one of the issues that Ram brings out is the disparity between people who can access the courts, and to what extent can, if litigation is to be a necessary part of getting just claims through the land acquisition process for structural reasons, as Deepak mentioned, what hope is there that people who are socioeconomically deprived could actually be able to use this channel appropriately?
Thanks. So, first of all, a disclaimer that I am not a litigating lawyer. So, I won't come to this from that point that, what makes people go for litigation. I think that's clearly laid out. Why people, because there is an incentive. But in a slightly more nebulous terms of my 33 years of being in the profession, besides the immediate monetary gains, there is something else that drives people to a forum like the courts, to a really difficult and cumbersome. It's sometimes even not just expensive, it's almost life-threatening to a lot of people, but yet people go to the courts. So I will go by, I think my colleague who was sitting in this chair before me didn't want to answer that question, but I would strongly go with the thing that there is this whole notion of getting justice from an objective forum is very deep-seated, and I think people do want to go for it. So because one has tracked litigants who have, for something like they are tracking murders of family members, and it's very difficult for them when the appeal goes up to the Supreme Court and stuff to track it, but they do it. They come from far and wide. So that's another one part of it. But as far as land is concerned, again, those issues are mixed, because why a person would litigate would be for that. One is that because the whole history of land acquisition is totally marked by this increase, as Professor Ram Singh has pointed out, and doesn't matter who it is, and also because of the provision that once when a lot of people are not reflected in the litigation, because there's a provision in the law that if somebody gets the benefit of enhancement, then there are others who are similarly placed who will also get the benefit. Now this new law, the LARR, actually opens up many more avenues for litigation. But as far as I understand from the CPR report, I don't really think they're trying to say that there should or should not be litigation, or whether it's good or bad. What I understand is just trying to reflect some part of the story through the litigation channel. So going from there, if you take the LARR as compared to the old law was very simple, very linear. So you had step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and boom, your land is more or less acquired. And when it comes to the compensation cases, the percentage that you've drawn out, and we talked about it that day, versus the other cases, they're actually at two very distinct stages. The litigation is of two very distinct stages. It's not about, so much as I understand it, it's not about people who are willing to give up their land or who don't want to contest it, because the contestation against the acquisition or the procedures is at a very different stage. But once the compensation, that means that the stage is over. All those stages are done with, and there's nothing more to contest except the amount of money that you're getting. So one is about that, about the litigation. However, what I want to bring, what I was briefed about, the whip that Namita has cracked on us all through that email, late night email, is to take you through what's happening in the states. Because there is a lot of hearsay on that, and unfortunately, with many of us, you don't go by seeing, checking on the act or the rules or the notifications and all that. We go by the Mann Ki Baats and the editorials and the 2x4 news pieces. So that's what one has encountered, even talking to most of the officials and people and civil society members. So to take you back a little bit in time, the LARR Act came into force on 1st of January 2014. Hot on its heels, the government changed, and like Deepak said, that they were very, they wanted to change something. They were very Professor Ram Singh said that they were not so much into how much you're paying out, but to do other procedures. So there are, the Mann Ki Baat on this exactly, I mean, was actually a very shocking thing to come from the CEO or the Pradhan Sevak of a country who's not been either been briefed properly about what the law is. At the parallelly on, we saw on television and things that there was the finance minister who was giving interviews, also saying not having looked at the act possibly, because the series and the major opposition party, when it did its campaign against this, had also not looked at an act which was passed by their own when they were in the saddle. So that's where the history of this law, it got very really muddled. And the only clear trajectory, legal trajectory that seemed to be happening was on the section 24(2), which was to say that these acquisitions have now lapsed. And because there is this 4 times compensation formula in the new act, so there are a lot of people, obviously for obvious reasons, and they should have even otherwise have gone, they were found to be approaching the High Courts and the Supreme Court. Much of that litigation itself was actually on ongoing litigation. It was grafted onto, so CMP was filed saying that, in an ongoing thing, either for increase of the compensation or the award, as some process was going on, and it was an additional application was filed that this is now lapsed. So a lot of those orders have actually come in that kind of litigation. So what happened now was that after the act came into force, I think people were still trying to figure out what this act, and this act takes a bit of figuring out, let me tell you. So in the first reading, I mean, my draft was full of exclamation marks and question marks and OMGs, and who drafted this, and because it neither adheres to the principles of law nor to the principles of simple, straight language. But in the second reading, you read it like a lawyer, and you begin to see a little more sense in it. And in the third reading, you read it like a judge, and you start applying harmonious construction and stuff, and and try making sense of it. So that, because you have to make sense of it. So I'm fairly cut and dried about that. That once you have a law and you've missed your seat on the chair when it was being talked about and being drafted, or you just failed doing it. So now here is the law, and what do you do with it? So now when the ordinance came in, that, in the states, that created a whole new scenario. So just the talk, you see, the mood was such, and that also shows that how the political mood or the political situation can so much impact, I mean, way down to the administration. It's not. If we think that administration is a cohesive process and it just goes on because, all of that, that it's a continuous thing, it's not. It just trickles down to the last person on the ground who can very brazenly tell you. I mean, when I was having a meeting, like a workshop, trying to explain this law to some revenue officials, they said, "Ab to ye to ab." You know, I don't name take names, but ये वो संभाल रहे हैं और हमें ये करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, नया कानून आ रहा है और हमको तो ये करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. What I told them as a very simple legal advice was that if you want your land for your very important projects, please get your notifications in place under this law, do the social impact assessments. There is a time cap of 6 months on doing the social impact. Anyway, you are doing it. Like the speakers before me said, that in any case, you cannot budget a project without doing a social impact assessment. You actually cannot design a project without, you can't budget for it. And so there was this is what was going on in many of the states. So some of the states, they just sat on everything and waited for something better to happen. On the other hand, there was some talk going on that states, go out and make your own laws. This law is useless, just trash it, you have the constitution. That's another question. Now you're having the constitutional power on paper to enact laws in the concurrent list or even with the president's assent is quite different from, because we're a country which has a constitution running now for a few years. So there is something called constitutional norms, there's constitutional precedent. You can't run a roller coaster over any law, even if it's in the concurrent list, by saying that, we just don't agree to it and we're going to overturn it. So there are linkages of other constitutional principles by which actually you cannot do that. You can't just pull the rug from under law passed by Parliament, but that was what was being attempted, and the ordinance and all that talk and the political scenario helped to sort of camouflage and cover up things, because things were happening on the ground. States were making their rules, and nobody really took notice of that. So what has happened is now with the Act. What has happened with the Act? As we know that the ordinance lapsed, and we are back to the same Act, but in the interim, the central government very wisely, they took out a removal of difficulties order, by which they retained in the amendment, the government had 1 year's time from the Act to extend the provisions to any of the provisions to certain acts which were listed in the schedule. So like the Coal Bearing Areas Act, and there are the Railways Act and Electricity Act. So because they would have lost the benefit of that section, so by the removal of difficulty clause, that was adopted. So now the compensation but only the compensation and R&R provisions are now extended to the scheduled acts. Now, so initially those scheduled acts are meant to be excluded from the 2013 Act, but because of the power to extend, it was extended, the R&R and compensation was extended. Now what Tamil Nadu did was to add another section, which actually in the parent act there is no such provision that states can add their own acts to the schedule. But Tamil Nadu brought in an amendment, added another section to the Act, and added another schedule to the Act. So they've added I think it's the State Highways Act, just like the National Highways Act, you can acquire. It has its own system of acquisition, which is actually a summary kind of a procedure. So they've added this thing, so which is, well, I mean, looking at the scale on what was going on, it's still a harmless amendment, and it got the presidential assent. What Gujarat has done is more recent, and Gujarat has run absolutely constitutionally unacceptable amendments, which have also been passed by the president, and the act has been notified. So, like somebody said, that the ordinance has been taken. The entire ordinance has sort of been taken and converted into to a state amendment. Not only that, the most brazen, I would say, is that the urgency powers which are so limited in the Parent Act, have been extended to say that there is a one-liner. In fact, the objects and reasons do not reflect that particular provision. So the urgency power now in Gujarat extends to an urgency acquisition can be done on any direction received from the central government. So this is the limits of subjectivity which I think no lawyer really, I mean, as a lawyer, it just boggles your mind, and I hope that very soon it's going to boggle the mind of the courts also. So what the central government itself doesn't have the power to do, to actually, just anything that it feels like it can declare as an urgency clause. Gujarat government now has that if the central government just writes them a letter saying do this, they have the power to acquire the land urgently. So it's totally it's a total contradiction in terms, and I have my doubts that it will stand for very long. Okay, now this is about the act. So what was going on with the act? So Rajasthan government drafted an act of its own. It sort of fell back into 1894 process and worse. And they were also going to, but somehow I think this scared them off a little bit, with the ordinance failing and all the political mahal. So they have retracted from that, and then they started so which brings us to the stage of that what were the governments doing in the rule-making process? Because the act is such that without rules and formats, this kind of an act will be a nightmare for anybody trying to acquire land or to do anything on the ground. It is completely confusing. So you have half a provision, say in, for example, in section 7 or 8 or 9, and the other half it tags to some section 90 something or something. So you actually have to pull things together from here, and you can easily go wrong. So if somebody is going to go just by the act and try and acquire land, I can just see that it's going to be a nightmare for litigation to go into court, because there are just so many places where you could go wrong. So the people who are just waiting to challenge, the minute you hit the hit the ground and start off with a section 4 SIA notification, you can go for a challenge because you haven't done the SIA selection right, or you haven't done the sufficient publications, because there are 5 or 6 modes of publication prescribed, which are safeguards, and I would also go by them. But I'm just saying that as far as litigation and who's going to go to court, there's throughout the act there are just, because everything is mandatory. The language of the act suggests that everything that you need to do, every process that you need to do is mandatory. How would it reflect to the person whose land is getting acquired? I think they're going to get mired in the number of documents and reports and things that are going to be generated, because the social impact assessment reports itself, if you look at the rules and the kind of data that they're supposed to collect in the social impact, and it's very good actually. Those rules and the parameters that are marked out will actually get you the real data. But like you said, if once they get into it, and the skills and who they're appointing, because right at the beginning I went to UP, and how much time? 2 minutes, okay. And there were these 2 young engineers who had been hired on the project, and when we said that you have to do the SIA first, they said, हाँ यही कर लेंगे, ये कर लेंगे, इससे पर ये तो इंजीनियर हैं, तो नहीं ये करते हैं, ये environment impact भी करते हैं. So that is the approach that you're seeing actually across all the states. That there's a very casual approach to this thing. Rajasthan, for example, has taken out a notification listing all the college professors from all the social work departments that they can think of as the social impact assessment units. They cannot do it. They neither have the skill nor the time. So then you have to, now every department will be doing its own creative number, trying to get past all this mess. Now, as far as the rules are concerned, there are some parts in the act where there is substantive rule making. So most of the states, what they did was that they copy pasted from the central rules. There was very, they just borrowed from there, and they became the state rules. Some states have done it intelligently. Unfortunately, it's a wild kind of intelligence, not the kind of intelligence that governments should show. It's the kind of intelligence that helps you to slip past or put really, so there is this section 46, which is a really poorly drafted section, which has got an obvious mistake in it. Like other sections also have mistakes. So which says that beyond a certain limit, even a private purchaser will have to give the R&R benefits. So Andhra Pradesh has put that limit as 5,000 acres. Beyond you, if you buy 5,000 acres, you're safe. So everybody is going to buy 4,999 acres without any, R&R responsibility. So there are a whole lot of things like this where you have to put the caps on the land. So for multi-crop irrigated land, I couldn't understand because I'm not an economist and I don't understand figures, but Madhya Pradesh for every district has set such a high figure for how much land beyond which you can't acquire multi-cropped irrigated land. So these are the kind of things that one ought to have looked at had one the opportunity, which on paper the act gives us, that you have to notify, put the rules on the website and invite objections. So some people have some of the states have put them on for 15 days. Some have put them on for 30 days, and the notification for the final rule says that it was put out to the public. We received whatever objections were there, we dealt with them, and we've passed the rules. And I don't think that anybody's actually looked at the rules or filed any objections. So these are the things that one has to start looking at. It's okay to parallelly say that the whole idea of eminent domain is not acceptable or whatever. So that's a parallel track that if you want, you can carry on, developing that or sticking to that theme. But this is when a law and rules are a reality and notified and they're affecting people on the ground, we need to take a closer look at those and start at whatever level the challenges, or at least guide the administration correctly, those of us who have any kind of leverage wherever, that this is not what it means, this is what it means. And I think in that, Namita's study would come out very useful, because one could, take out some of those cases and say that, what is the exact import of the legal provisions that have gone into it. So as far as the states are concerned, it's not, I would say my assessment is it doesn't look like a very happy situation. The ground level, the revenue departments and the other departments are completely confused. They're not understanding the law. They're saying we will still go by the DLC rates because, like you said, the others said, they feel safe in the DLC rates. When you show them the section and say, abhi ye formula hai, ab iske alawa agar karoge, to problem aayegi. So they say हमको ऊपर से जब circular आएगा तो हम करेंगे, नहीं तो हम तब तक हम करते ही कुछ नहीं. So which is, from looking at it from their point of view, I think that's that's pretty reasonable, because it's following the law has never been one of the big things that has been touted in administration. कि आप तो कानून से चलो. In fact, there's even amongst the public and within the administration itself, people say, if somebody follows the law, they say, "Bada kanunchi collector hai, usse kya baat kare?" So that it's, it's a mix of these factors that, when you have this situation on the ground, like you brought it out very nicely in your report, a law like this, which is so complex, it's also written complex, in a very complex manner, plus the political overtones. I really have nothing to say at the moment, except that we have to also wait it out. It is really too early, because very few of the initial notifications have started coming out under this law. But I think the message is now definitely is going down that this law is here to stay. Touching it will be a problem, which is another sad thing, because this law needed a lot of touching. It just needs to be straightened out, and, sort of all these anomalies have to be removed for it to be useful for anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Abha. So finally, we have Jackie Dugard. Jackie is an associate professor at the School of Law at University of Witwatersrand. And one of her major research areas is the role of law and courts in socioeconomic rights, and she currently chairs the Socioeconomic Rights Institutes of South Africa. So an appropriate segue from Abha's focus on whether or not the processes in this particular stuff is something that can actually guarantee a certain kind of right going forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much to CPR, and I've found so far this to be an incredibly interesting discussion. I have to upfront make a disclaimer. I'm not an expert on Indian law whatsoever, so I'm here mainly to learn and also to try to develop with some colleagues here a comparative project. So what on land? And so what I wanted to just briefly share is some observations from the perspective of an outsider who is involved in these issues in my own country, South Africa. And please forgive me if what I'm saying, if I've misunderstood or if it is irrelevant in this context, but I'm just going to try to bring out those observations. And the first is that this report, which I think is obviously an astounding contribution, and I see everybody here really reinforcing that. To me, what is striking about it is that it seems to be very apolitical. It's not situating the issue of land in a context, in a political context. Now, I'm not sure if that is because of this political moment or because this is how CPR reports are constructed. But to me, the very critical issue here about land acquisition and about eminent domain, which in my country we called expropriation, is this issue is that it's about a moment in time. Because after all, and I thought it was interesting that previous speaker, I think Gopal, and please forgive me, I'm a very informal person, so I refer to people by their first names, and I hope they would do the same. I think he referred to John Locke saying, where there is no property, there is no injustice. And that reminds me, I teach property law, and I teach property law from a radical perspective, which is quite unusual in my country. And I always start by telling my students the quote from Proudhon, which is often attributed to Karl Marx, which is, all property is theft. So it's, when one is talking about the eminent domain of the state, one is obviously always talking about a moment in time of taking away land from people who have title over it and putting it into the public domain for some purpose or another. Now, and this comes to what Ram was talking about as well. What struck me in reading this report is it progressive or is it regressive, the way it's operating here in India? And this is interesting because we had a little conversation at lunch. It's interesting for me to find myself on the side of an economist. In South Africa, I was saying economists are usually very conservative, but I'm finding some interesting synergy here in terms of the fact that what seems to be going on is very much a private title elite tilted model here, where, for example, commercial property rates are given much higher when they go to court, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, to me, an interesting perspective on something which in South Africa is completely the polar opposite. And why is that the case? The case in South Africa is the polar opposite because the moment in time where we are in South Africa is that people who were dispossessed of land under colonialism and under apartheid, that is the majority black population in South Africa, who were afforded no land title and their title was taken away, or indeed they had no private title because they operated communal land rights. The post-apartheid regime since 1994 has been trying to give people back title, and to do so that has involved land restitution, in terms of which the state has to expropriate land from private title holders, which are normally white farmers who gained that land under apartheid or colonialism. And what our criticism has been is that, in fact, they have been giving market value. Now, I'll come back to the market value question. So they've been giving market value to these dispossessors of land, and yet, in fact, interestingly enough, our Constitution, the operative clause is Section 25, the Property Clause, does not mandate market value. It has 5 requirements, or when one is looking at compensation. There are 5 things that you're supposed to take into consideration. One is the history of acquisition of the land. The second is the use of the land. The third is the public purpose for which it's going to be expropriated, including land restitution. Then there is market value. And then there is a very interesting one, which I don't know if it operates in India or not. It's previous land subsidies. If that landowner has got subsidies in the past, that should be taken off the amount, because that's considered to be double dipping. You can't now get the full market value if you've already been subsidized as a private owner. Now, this never occurs in practice. And so for us, the issue is very much that we are arguing that it should not be market value, because we don't see why possessors of land and private title holders should get market value when, in fact, the public purpose, I would say, in South Africa far outweighs the private individual land owning interests. So just the politics of this is, I think, something that strikes me. And then some specific things that struck me. The first is that if litigation, and these are sort of comments and questions, if litigation over compensation in India stalls acquisition for 20 years. Now, by the way, in South Africa, that shouldn't be the case, because we actually are not supposed to follow a willing buyer, willing seller mandate, and the courts have clarified that, in fact, any discussion over compensation will not ultimately hold up expropriation. But here I gather that that is not the case, that, in fact, you could hold up for 20 years. What happens in the meantime? You cannot. Okay, so that's what I wanted. Okay.
The transfer of land happens.
And then you carry on. Okay, great, thank you. The second question is the public purpose. I think that I got the, I heard or read that you might even consider public purpose to be the transfer of land to private developers for shopping malls, etc. If you can argue, if the government can argue that a shopping mall is in the public interest, but this would include private transfer, which is obviously an extremely controversial issue. The next thing is land audit or land register. I'm getting the distinct impression there isn't such a clear thing of land registration, and you don't have clear land records, so this is part of the problem. That's the other observation. And then what happens about, I haven't heard anyone talk here about, and as I understand, this is part of the amendment, if you're going to be compensated for land rights that are not ownership, use, tenancy, labor, etc., how is that evaluated? And does that come on top of? So if you've got a landowner and a labor tenant on the same piece of property, do both get compensated, and how is that compensation calculated for the non-ownership rights? And then finally, the final observation is the striking observation, which I may have got wrong, which is that this crazy idea that there was this complete disjuncture between what the collectors are doing and what the courts are doing in terms of compensation, and that it seems that different methodologies of calculation are being used. One is the circle rates, and I'm not sure what that is. But secondly is the so-called market value. But then I hear, to my amazement, that market value is just known to be completely undervaluing. So in fact, it's not market value, right? I mean, because market value is market value in the rest of the world. It's what the market says. So I'm understanding now that this is not, in fact, market value, but some other form of value. So I think, these are extremely striking things about the Indian example. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that the non-land ownership question that you raised, I think, is something that really needs some discussion, because it's novel. And there isn't that much jurisprudence around that process, and it'd be interesting to hear that particular story. And also a small issue which does come up in the urban space largely, is the issue of while there is still a fair degree of land titling that happens with respect to agricultural properties, there is very limited that happens with respect to homesteads. And therefore, when you end up acquiring inhabited areas, at that point in time, it becomes difficult for people to establish claims and rights over what is actually homestead land, especially when you're looking at the transition from rural to urban.